be honest, I don't think it quite works like that.
Picking up where I left off is George Benos. He's as dedicated an angler as you're ever likely to see and brings a ton of experience to the Rotary films.
That was the one, mate. If things aren't happening for a long period, you're starting to question everything. It probably has got so much to do with it and we don't even realise it. You know, when that seed kicks up, you can smell it. They suck it in with a lot more purpose, which is another thing that Elle said about. Most people now, they're all looking for silver. Are they big, blatant gravel areas? No, they're areas that everybody avoids. I'll put a bait on it, and I've done that and caught. Let's switch it a little bit. Boilies. I don't buy that always. It's got to be blatant in their face. And if I thought I could catch it on the bright yellow just wanged out, mate, I'd be doing it all day long.
Sorry to interrupt, but whilst I have your attention, I just want to talk about a couple of things. Firstly, would you please subscribe to our YouTube channel? We would massively appreciate it, and you will stay very much up to date with everything YouTube orientated that we do. Secondly, and as well as asking you for a little favour, we have a little something that might be of interest to you. If you click the link in description or scan the QR code on screen, you will be entitled to 50% off your first 3 months as a Cypography member. And as a Cypography member, you will get access to over 1,000 videos and several other member perks. Picking up where I left off is George Benos, a man renowned for having caught a staggering amount of truly big carp and for his somewhat unique approach to mass baiting. He's as dedicated an angler as you're ever likely to see and brings a ton of experience to the Rotary films.
That was the one, mate.
Right, George, you have in your possession the Rotary Films little black book, so please open that and you will be able to read what Elliot has set for you.
In recent years, and inspired by a conversation with Simon Scott, I've come to wonder how much oxygen levels play their part in carp fishing. So many factors can dictate the oxygen in a lake, but reading the levels accurately without spending vast amounts of money on a meter is almost impossible. Is this something you think about, and what are your thoughts on this subject?
Well, I'll be honest with that. It's not something that I've thought of lots and lots, but in times, I tend to think about more of that sort of stuff in times of struggle, if you know what I mean. So, you know, if you've gone, especially in the summer months when oxygen is probably going to be at its lowest, I would guess. You know, you've got algae blooms, that sort of stuff, and you're struggling, and everybody else on the lake seems like they're struggling, even though they might not be telling you the whole truth. But that's when I start to think about oxygen and low oxygen levels. Is it causing them to feed less? Should I be putting less bait in? You know, should I be fishing a different way? That sort of stuff, really. But I must admit, it's not something that plays a massive part in my angling, although, you know, with the weather that we've had, especially this year, I suppose we should take that into account, especially when considering using vast amounts of bait, that sort of stuff, because, you know, lots of bait, carp not feeding, can very quickly kill areas, etc, etc. So yeah, like I say, it's not something I thought about loads and loads, but we seem to be getting it a lot more now. You know, a lot of fisheries suffer with low oxygen as well. I mean, up and down the country, you're always hearing of big oxygen crashes, lots of fish dying, and that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think it's got to play a part in our angling to a certain extent, but short of, you know, like Elle says, going and buying an oxygen meter and measuring the oxygen every week. No, you know, maybe you do that with temperature, but certainly not really going to do it with oxygen. But yeah, I definitely take it into consideration, and this is what we was talking about just before we went on camera. I was actually talking about that very same thing with another angler that fishes here where I'm fishing now. I wonder if the oxygen's a bit on the low side, that sort of stuff, you know. Yeah, it's well worthwhile question asking.
Obviously, like you mentioned, George, there is the food aspect to this, and the amount of oxygen that decaying bait sucks out the water potentially. You're an angler that's used a lot of bait. Is this the first time that kind of consideration has come to mind, or did you always tailor how much you put in, depending on how much oxygen you felt was in the water?
I wouldn't say it's played like a massive part in like my baiting campaigns as such, but the last sort of maybe 3 or 4 years where we've had really hot summers. I mean, our summers seem to be getting hotter year on, year out. So it's crossed my mind, definitely. But you tend to gauge that on how the carp react as well. I mean, a happy carp, jumping, showing, feeding, head and shouldering, you know you haven't got low oxygen. You know, you can normally, as an angler, tell the telltale signs, you know, fish struggling, and not just carp. You know, it tends to be the smaller stuff that goes first, your pike, your perch. So, yeah, I think about it, but not on a massive scale. But
So it's not a consideration session to session, but
certainly
it might be a consideration throughout the whole campaign.
correct, and more so in the summer months, rightly or wrongly. I know oxygen crashes don't happen just in the summer months, but generally they tend to happen when the weather is warm or we've had like real big algae blooms. I mean, I'm always a little bit, you know, if you've got massive algae, like the water's gone like blue-green as such, and then we've got storms coming in, that sort of thing, it sort of plays on your mind a little bit. But thankfully, I've never been in a situation where, you know, a stock has been lost or they've lost loads of fish through low oxygen, which has obviously led me to think more or not think about that subject as much had I have experienced it, if you know what I mean. I mean, God forbid, if it happened somewhere, I would probably be a lot more conscious of the fact. But yeah, I mean, it's, like I say, it's a worthwhile question asking and almost thinking of, and I suppose him asking that question as well has made me think about it a little bit more now, and perhaps going forward I might think about it a bit more. But
I think the thing is, though, thinking about it is one thing, but quite often it's the sort of thing that can only really be used to explain why things aren't happening, as opposed to something you can then change.
correct. Yeah, oh yeah. So like I sort of said a minute ago, I mean, if things aren't happening for long periods, you're starting to question everything as an angler, aren't you? And it's not just oxygen, it's bait, it's this, it's that. But that could be a massive factor. I mean, if you've got lowish oxygen and they're not having it, why are they not having it? It's probably down to that, isn't it? Yeah, you know, the pH in the water isn't right, whatever, like, is causing it. But there's obviously an explanation, isn't there? Because carp are happy in warm water, but if that warm water has got next to no oxygen in it and they're pretty much struggling almost to stay alive, then that would explain why they're not feeding.
And do you buy into the whole the idea that obviously the difference between day and night when it comes to weed photosynthesizing and then respiring at night, kicking out carbon dioxide? Do you ever think about that when you're placing hook baits and choosing baited areas?
I mean, generally when I'm fishing big baited areas, they're not around, they're open water areas. So although there's weed there in some cases, they're not like tiny little bays and stuff like that. But obviously bite times at this time of year tend to be in the early mornings when it's just sort of getting like when you imagine the oxygen to be sort of rising up again. Hence that might have a, you know, it probably has got so much to do with it and we don't even realise it. But at the end of the day, we're just anglers, aren't we? We're not scientists as such. We take lots of varying factors in everything, and you know, everyone has these things going through their head, and I suppose we all arrive at different destinations, if you know what I mean, of what to do. And perhaps subconsciously that's what I'm thinking about. They're not having it. I wonder if, like, oxygen, you know, it doesn't come out as, oh, oxygen's low, I'm not putting in loads of bait type of thing, but perhaps it is subconsciously. But
Did you arrive at any conclusions when you chatted with this angler the other day? Because you both fished a long time.
yeah, we have, yeah. We sort of came to the conclusion that the oxygen must be low, but having not seen signs of oxygen being low, you sort of almost like discard it, if that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, there's got to be something, isn't there?
Yeah, because you'd think there are like myriad stages in between oxygen just being a little bit less than they'd like, right the way through to fish dying. And somewhere on that scale, we're all the time,
definitely.
aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, it's not got to be, you know, they're popping up dead or they're on the surface gasping for air, so they're not feeding oxygen levels low. They could just be a little bit low where, you know, me or you, yeah, if you climb to the summit of a big mountain, the oxygen level is less. You can't perform as well in your exercise or whatever you're doing, but you're not keeling over dying, are you? Same thing. So if they're not as active, they're not using as much oxygen. So perhaps they're not feeding as hard because they can't use all that oxygen that isn't available in that.
So in terms of like takeaway from this, George, anyone listening to this, is there a yardstick when you would start to scale back bait? What would you have to be seeing to make you think, you know what, this isn't getting eaten, I'm gonna rest it a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, generally, you know when your bait's being eaten, you know, bird activity, carp activity, weather, if it's ramping hot, and sometimes even on your leads, yeah, you know, if you're landing on your spot and you're using a lot of seed, for example, then, you know, when that seed kicks up, you can smell it when you bring them leads in. So all of them different factors are telling you, like, mate, your bait's starting to rot a little bit, you need to ease up. That's how I would sort of come to that sort of conclusion. So you're taking in lots of factors, not just oxygen. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, that's how I think most of us do it, or certainly what I would say are the switched on ones would do it. Yeah.
Right, George, the first thing that Elliot tackled last time was his love for gravel spots. Are they something that you actively seek out to deploy your baiting campaigns over?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting one actually. And I would say I am an avid gravel fan without wanting to agree with El. But what I would say with that is, for me, sort of mid-spring, if you like, into and out the back end of summer, I would actively look to bait my, if I'm doing big baiting campaigns, it would be on gravel. I love gravel. But as the weather starts to turn, so we go into your sort of autumn months, etc., and the temperature starts to drop, I do tend to favour a little bit softer ground, like silt, not deep silt, but siltier ground. With the thing in mind with that, for me, is I personally think that the silt retains a bit more heat. So, you know, once your temperatures are dropping in the water and, you know, you're losing degrees in the water, the food as such tends to congregate more into those siltier areas, your natural food, if you like. And therefore I tend to sort of move my spots away from gravel at that time of the year. But, you know, first and foremost, I probably am, I would say, 80 to 90% gravel. Yeah. And that also, there's a few factors in that, I think, as well, because it can depend massively on the lake as well. If you fish a pit that is silty as hell, I'm actively looking for gravel, yeah? But if I went to a pit and 98% of it, which is everywhere I put my marker, gravel, 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 I'm then going to sort of almost be thinking the other way. It's like, if I could find a bit of a softer spot, you know, a bit of a siltier spot, perhaps I'd base it on that. But if you're looking at doing a big baiting campaign, inevitably, and I think El touched on this as well with what he was saying, you know, it might start off a little bit sort of soft, but, you know, if it's a gravel pit as such, it's going to go through to the gravel anyway. And with the amount of bait that I would be looking at putting on it over the course of a time, it's going to end up gravel anyway, so why not just start it on gravel, if that makes sense? Do you know what I mean? Because you're sort of making it harder for yourself. You know, you pick a weedy spot or what have you, and you've got to wait for that to clean by baiting it, or you've got to go out there and rake it and prep it, etc., etc. You're just making it harder for yourself. Why not pick an area that's already clean, that you know they visited? One thing that El did say was, like, he tries to avoid some of them real big, blatant gravel areas. But again, what does everyone do, right? Most people now, through magazines or, you know, YouTube, whatever, they're all looking for silt. So therefore, these big, blatant gravel areas, are they big, blatant gravel areas? No, they're areas that everybody avoids. So in my sort of thinking, I'm thinking, well, everyone's avoiding that massive big gravel area. I'll put a bait on it, and I've done that and caught. So it sort of goes like that as well. So you are basing it on the lakes that you fish as well. Again, it's just lots of different factors. I think you can't say that any one lake is the same. Most lakes are different, but certain lakes you might not be able to get a bite on gravel. Therefore, I'll change it. I won't just be tunnel vision, I'm only fishing gravel. If I don't get a bite on gravel, then I'm not catching, type of thing. You know what I mean? But I would definitely say I agree with El in that aspect of, you know, at certain times gravel.
What about then the idea that gravel spots make it more difficult to get a pickup? Do you subscribe to that?
Probably not. No, I get the bit about it's a little bit more visual. Yeah, they can probably see your rig, etc., etc. But when you're say you're fishing silt, for example, you know, you've got your lead core leader on, or your sort of naked leader or whatever, it can still be seen. I mean, we've all put rigs in the edge on blatant gravel and on silt. I mean, silt is generally quite dark, yeah? You put a dark piece of lead core, you can see that, probably more so than you could see that dark bit of lead core going across gravel. So I don't really buy that idea, personally. I just think if they're that wary that they are going to suss your rigs out, it matters not whether they're on silt, on weed or gravel. In some cases, probably yes, and that maybe goes to when you're only feeding, or, you know, PVA bags, for example, small traps as such. But in big areas, no. Yeah, maybe in weed a little bit, because there's so many bits of strands going all over the place. The chances of them actually saying, you know, looking at that and going, oh, that's a bit of lead core, I'm not gonna take that because that's lead core. As long as that bit of lead core is fairly slack, I don't think they really pay too much attention to it. So sometimes I think we give them a little bit too much credit. But, you know, when you watch some of them underwater videos and you see how they get away for it, am I thinking the whole wrong way? And I should take that more into account. But over the years, I've caught plenty of carp from blatant gravel spots to suggest otherwise, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. And I think the next thing that leads on naturally from that is you've touched on the fact you fished a lot of different types of lake, George, including, you know, what were at the time right on the circuit, the likes of Roach, for instance, where very, very pressured, they're seeing good angling going on all the time. Did you ever get the sense that a spot could go past a productive state and into a state that you might call blown? How does that even happen? Can that happen?
I think it can, yep. And I think I touched on that once before chatting to you about a spot that I fished on Roach. I almost got the best out of it, where I felt that I had caught the vast majority of the stock that frequented in that area, if you know what I mean. And I think that's how they do blow. I mean, when you say blow, do they really blow? Because the next year it might do all them same bites again. But I certainly feel within that time period that you're fishing it, that, you know, 6 months, 3 months, whatever, once you've nailed X amount of carp, you may well have caught most of the carp that tend to visit that zone. And that's where I would say spots blow. I don't think spots blow in general when no carp will come back to them ever again. because the following year, you know, they've had their winter, they've gone and done something elsewhere, and then the following year it all starts again on exactly the same place. And also when you look at like day tickety type venues, and I think El again brushed on this, he was saying, you know, you have that spot that everyone, you know, your 18 wraps or whatever, bungs it out to the same spot, 5 spawns of bait, and they catch, and eventually, you know, do they blow? Because they're catching from them week in, week out. You may stop getting the better ones, the ones that are a bit more weary, but what you would say are the mugs of the lakes, they'll keep coming out from them. At the end of the day, I think you're feeding them, yeah? So where they're seeing food in general, you know, it's not gospel and it's just my opinion, they will go where that food is to a certain extent, but by association, they will learn, if I keep feeding on that spot, all of a sudden I keep picking up this round ball and I'm getting pulled out the lake. So they learn like that, but I think after a while they almost forget about it again, if you know what I'm saying. Dependent on water, dependent on carp. Yeah.
Have you seen that, George, where that winter reset that almost like reboots them and they're happy to go then back to the spot where you've gone back in the same swim and caught the same carp?
Yep, 100%. And I've done it on my current water here where we are now, Burfield. You know, I've caught certain carp and every single one has been a different one that year. And then the spot's dried up and I've moved to, not swim, but I've moved to a different spot and caught different carp from there. But then the following year, I've gone back to that original spot and caught the same group of carp. And it's like, they're coming back, but it's almost like they need that reset period to forget about it. I mean, what is it? Goldfish have only got like a 3-second memory. Carp certainly haven't, but it might be a little bit longer, like a 3-month memory or whatever. But yeah, I do believe that, mate, yeah.